disproportionate price with regards to long-term career earnings if they become mothers. That's a very narrowly focused problem, and it's a problem that might need to be addressed. But that's not the same as the gender pay gap. It's a much more defined problem.
Yes,
and part of the problem is, how do we best...
Can we get you to carry a banner for that part of the feminist crusade then?
Not if it's part of the feminist crusade, no. Because that would mean I'd have to carry a banner for what I regard as a rather reprehensible ideology. But I do...
Overall, feminism is a reprehensible ideology?
Well, what percentage of British women regard themselves as feminists now?
I don't know.
7%.
Well, it
and
depends how you ask a question, I would guess.
Well, no, the reasonable measurements of it estimate there's something like that. It's a very small percentage.
Really?
Yes, really.
Well,
it's a very small minority, even if it's not 7%. And part of the reason for
would
that is
make it inherently wrong? I mean, I'm not sure it's 7%, and but I think that's one on which we could all go and bandy a bit of research on the isms. But would it necessarily be such a bad idea? I mean, you must have sometimes stuck up for minority rights, even if the idea is
first
right.
of all,
as you say in your book,
women aren't a minority, by the way. They're actually a majority.
Precisely so. So
right,
in that sense...
they're not minority rights that we're talking about here if we're talking about female rights. Have I stuck up for minority rights? Yes. I don't see the world
Well, you've
from
said the
that
7% example would suggest that even a small group within women thought that feminism was... You just decide yourself whether feminism's a good thing or not. It doesn't really matter.
Well, I think it's not a good thing because it plays identity politics games, and I'm not a fan of identity politics games and the collectivist viewpoint. I don't think that men should be set against women. I don't think that we should view the world as a competition between men and women. I don't think we should view history as a structure that pitted oppressed women against the oppressor men. I don't like that story. I think it's a nasty story, and I think it's designed... It's destined to divide us in ways that will not be good. I think it's a story fundamentally predicated on resentment. I don't think it's an accurate view of the way things unfolded in the past. And I don't think women were as powerless or as unable to contribute as the feminists claim they were before, like, 1960.
But earlier you thought things did come into balance for women in the 60s, so something changed. Something was good about the 60s, yes?
I thought that the birth control pill was invented. And the reason that women have far more flexibility, let's say, in their lives now is fundamentally because they have more control over their reproductive status. And that never really happened until the 1960s.
Yes, but they may have built other conclusions on that other than that, great, I can control my fertility. It's great, I can control my fertility. Now what is the question that we're tussling
Well, that is, but that's exactly it. That is precisely the question that we're dealing with. But the causal order of that is, oh, now I can control my fertility. Now what? That's a biological revolution.
But that has consequences for men as well as women, right?
Of course it does.
Good.
And there are consequences.
So what do men have to change? We've had a lot of focus here on how women have had it better than that perhaps you think that modern feminists think they have.
I don't know.
Do men need to change?
I don't know if women had it better than modern feminists think they had it. I think that if women had it hard in the past, which they certainly do, that the amount of that was attributable to male oppression is far smaller than the feminists claim, because nature had her hand in that. You know, the average person in the Western world in 1895 lived on less than $1 a day in today's money. It's below the UN guidelines for poverty. So life was very hard for men and women for almost all of human history. And to view that as part of an oppression narrative on the part of men, I think, is one of the things that is very hard on young men, for example, when they're trying to take their place in the world. So how would men have to change because women have control over the reproductive function? That's an open-ended question. I don't know. Casual sex is much more available than it used to be. That's one way that men have been able to change. They haven't had to take on responsibility for adopting a long-term monogamous relationship in order to get sexual access. So that's a big change. It's also enabled men to not grow up to quite a great degree.
I'm not sure if you're welcoming that or
I'm not saying it's a good thing. It is very complicated.
So movements that bring, that whole difficulty of the mating game or the hookup culture into the debate must therefore be a good thing, and presumably you would also, but would you welcome that?
I think there's very little good about the hookup culture. I think there's very little good about casual sexual relationships. I don't think they're good for men or for women. And I mean...
And where do you stand on the Me Too campaign? Good thing?
I think that it risks damaging the presumption of innocence. I mean, there's plenty.
Is there more to it than that?
Oh, sure. Women face the arbitrary admixture of sexual advance and workplace performance all the time. It's a very complicated thing to sort out. We don't know how to sort it out exactly because, NBC, for example, the American TV station, has made it policy that you're not to hug your co-workers, which, may be true. Although I don't think it's the sort of thing that a corporation might be deciding for people. But we don't know exactly what the rules are for governing male and female behavior in the workplace because we've only been working together for about 35 years.
We don't know. After 35 years, wouldn't it be possible to figure something out?
Not when you're talking about a transformation in behavior that's that profound. I mean, we don't know how men and women can work properly together in the workforce. It's very complicated.
But
men don't know how to compete
millions
with
of men and women across the world go to work together day in, day out.
But you're the one who asked about Me Too.
You're the one who. Don't start with you're the one who.
Me Too is an expression of the fact that men and women are having a hard time regulating their behavior in the workplace. It's the only reason I responded to that, because the question was posed.
I think it's more broadly suggesting that some men are having a grave problem with it. What is the lesson of the Harvey Weinstein story for you?
Someone should have said something about Harvey Weinstein much sooner.
But we could start somewhere else. We could start with Harvey Weinstein was wrong to do what he did before we get other people should have spoken out. That's the secondary order issue.
Fair enough. I thought that went without saying. There are going to be psychopathic predators. They're going to exist. And what has to happen is that people have to stop them because they won't stop themselves. And so I thought that was sort of implicit in the statement. Obviously, he shouldn't have done what he did.
But you don't think that the culture in which he was operating, that there was particularly in his world,
Hollywood?
In his world and in many other worlds, that there was a culture of, this guy's a powerful guy, he's the great silverback gorilla here, let him get on with it.
Oh, I think that culture was everywhere in Hollywood, which is why I think
Not
it's
just
actually
in
quite... Well, Hollywood particularly. I mean, the casting couch idea has been around for a very long period of time. And I think that the Hollywood types who are all upset about this should look to their own devices with regards to the role they've played in fostering the culture that managed that. So
it sounds like Hollywood itself, or the women, or who?
No, the entire culture. We were talking about culture. Yes. So, I mean, it's certainly that the Hollywood...
What's the sensible thing for women to do about Me Too, to your mind, and what's the less sensible thing?
That's a hard question. It isn't obvious to me exactly what men and women have to do in the workplace to make that kind of sexual predation much less likely, with also subjecting themselves to restrictions on the sexual aspect of their existence that would be unbearable. It's very difficult.
What would be unbearable about that?
How about everybody wears the same uniform to work? That's what the Maoists... Well, look, if you want to eliminate the differences between men and women sexually at the workplace, you have to constrain the sexual differences. I mean, men wear suits to work.
Well, we don't have to eliminate the sexual differences for people to work together with respect.
You have to eliminate them to some degree.
Why? I'm genuinely
because you're trying. The question here is, to what degree should sexually related behavior be impermissible at the workplace? Well, it depends on how you define it. Should you be able to dress attractively? And if you can dress attractively, what do you mean by attractively exactly? Like precisely? I got into trouble.
I mean, I hope I dressed nicely today. You look very well dressed to me, right? You're a man, I'm a woman, we're both nicely dressed. Now we're getting on with the interview. What's the problem?
Well, the problem is the boundaries of what constitutes nicely dressed. Because because part of what constitutes attractiveness, part of what constitutes nicely dressed is sexual attractiveness. Because you can't separate out human attractiveness, sexual attractiveness, from human attractiveness. And so then the question is exactly where are the boundaries? And that's what the discussion is about. Where are the boundaries?
The dinner parties, which are described in a foreword to your book, where friends enjoy debates and disagreements. Do you think in the broader conversation we've lost that spirit, or in danger of losing that spirit?
Oh, I think we're always in danger of losing that spirit, right? Because lack of freedom is much more probable than freedom. We have to be very careful to maintain that because it's always under threat. But I do feel that it's under threat now. I think that people are very careful about what they say in ways that aren't good. I think the fact that many comedians won't perform on university